Hey home bakers, it's Jack here at bakerjack.co.uk, bringing you your bread making tip every once in a while. And loads of you have asked me the question, how come I need yeasted dough but I don't need sour dough? Well, let me tell you, shall I? Roll that theme tune. Hello to you and welcome back to the Bake with Jack YouTube channel, where I believe that a true understanding of the principles of making bread will help you make amazing bread at home for the rest of your life. If you agree with me and you're new here, consider clicking subscribe before you go. Over the past 6 months or so, you may have seen hundreds of no-knead sourdough bread making recipe videos pop up in your YouTube feed, which is quite funny really, because I never knead my sourdough anyway, and let me tell you why. Our bread dough, yeasted or sourdough, needs to be strong. It needs to have strength to be able to hold all the gas produced by the yeast, whether it's baker's yeast that you put in or whether it's natural yeast nurtured and looked after within your sourdough starter. That's how your dough puffs up, and the strength that it needs comes from something called gluten development. Within the bread making process, there are two things that develop the all important gluten: kneading the dough, i.e. physical work, and resting the dough, i.e. doing nothing. And at this point you might be thinking, hold on a minute, those two things surely contradict one another. How can doing the work and not doing the work both result in gluten development? Yeah, I understand that, and the point is that if there's enough time in the recipe to develop the gluten, it can replace the physical work altogether. Or on the other side of the same coin, as the bread making process is shortened, as baker's yeast allows us to shorten the bread making process, kneading is now required to make that strength in the beginning. So as an example, let's compare the timescales of a generalized yeasted loaf of bread to that of a sourdough. In a yeasted loaf of bread recipe, certainly my one, typically your dough will be around for 2.5 to 3 hours before you bake it. Then you bake it and now it's bread. But because of the time spent beating dough is relatively short, you need to knead the dough in the first place to develop the gluten, therefore giving the dough the strength that it needs to be able to puff up nice. Got it? Sourdough, on the other hand, will typically be around for 6.5 to 7 hours before it hits the fridge, ready to bake in the morning. That's much longer, and all of that additional time spent being dough, where the flour is sitting in the moisture, absorbing it, soaking it up, gluten is developing by itself, and so strength then comes with that. That doesn't mean that we can just do nothing, but it does mean we don't have to put in that 8 minutes of hard work at the beginning of the process. We can rely on time to develop the gluten while we give it a stretch and fold every once in a while to develop the all-important structure. I never knead my sourdough or any of my sourdoughs, whether it's a loaf or whatever, because it just feels unnecessary. I used to, and you might want to, and let me tell you why. For many of you, not all of you, the holy grail of sourdough bread, the aim of the game is to get those big holes inside. That open crumb texture is often regarded as the highest level of success, and to get that you make a wet dough. You don't knead it, you stretch and fold it along the fermentation time, just enough to build structure without working the gluten. If you want to get a tight crumb, no, that sounds gross. If you want a finer crumb texture so your jam sandwich doesn't leak all over your Ralph Lauren, then knead it, because that's what you get with a kneaded dough. Small holes. During lockdown, I went through a period of making sourdough in a tin to remove some of the fat factor for myself. The bread was for sandwiches. I didn't want it to have big holes, so I found a middle ground in between kneading and not kneading that worked for me. I continued my normal no-knead sourdough process, but when it came to stretching and folding, I was a little bit more heavier-handed with things. Instead of 6 to 8 folds, for example, I would do 16 to 18, following the principles, being a little bit firmer with the dough and putting in that extra work in the hope of getting a finer crumb texture, and this is what it looked like. It's bread fit for my purpose, and that's the whole point. And with this knowledge, you might want to borrow a bit of that sourdough no kneading process and apply it to your yeasted breads. My go-to focaccia recipe, for example, is a no knead recipe. I make the dough wetter than normal. I reduce the amount of yeast, making the process longer than normal, and along the way I stretch and fold the dough, building the structure that it needs to be able to puff up nice, and it's flipping delicious if I do say so myself. So experiment with kneading and not kneading, and that grey area in the middle too, to see what works for you. Quick shout out before we go. Linda sent me this wonderful card from Washington, just to tell me that I'm a freaking magical unicorn, which is really lovely. Linda, it sounds like you're really enjoying making your bread at home, and I'm unbelievably chuffed to have been a part of that for you. And hey, if I'm a freaking magical unicorn, well, I guess that means that so are all of you. Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you everyone for being here. I look forward to seeing you very soon for another one. Bye-bye. And there it is. I hope you learned something from this bread tip video. I hope there was something helpful to you. And don't forget, if you want to pick up Bake with Jack dough scrapers, aprons, pruning cloths, you can do that at the Bake with Jack online shop. Visit bakewithjack.co.uk/shop, shipping to you all over the world. See ya.